Hello, I'm H&B News Deputy Editor Neil Merritt, and welcome to our latest Heatingcast. In this edition, we'll be looking specifically at the challenges of heat decarbonisation and the role that the electric grid might play in the coming decades. This is one of the key focuses of our recent Future of HVAC Summit, the first day of which considered how the gas and electric grids would need to evolve to meet aspirations for smarter, more effective heating that can truly be called low carbon. To discuss these challenges, I'm joined by James Standley, Managing Director of Kensa Heat Pumps, Tom Robbins of Home Control Specialist Switchee, and Phil Steele of renewables provider Octopus Energy. James Standley of Kensa started us off by saying a significant increase is needed in the adoption of heat pumps in the UK market. He accepts that at present this market remains relatively small. However, he also notes that technologies are very much ready to be deployed at larger scale.
There's quite a big increase to be had in the size of the UK heat pump market. It's very small at the moment. Heat pumps are ready to be deployed, and it's going to be a challenge. I think it's going to be something like 50% year on year for the next decade or so. What I want us to be careful of is that we don't interpret that challenge as a sign that the solution isn't ready or suitable. The fact that there's a difficult growth path doesn't mean that it's not the right answer. I wouldn't want the wrong message to go through there. So that was my comment there. I think is that the solutions are ready. It's capable of being a huge part of the solution. To decarbonising heat and ready to go right now.
Excellent. That was because, as you said, that was and the point raised again about the challenges of having technologies ready, and that the public awareness we talked about during our summit at the minute, that actually I know the Heat Pump Association had sort of said, well, actually we've got a solution right now that's ready there. So I was wondering, James, is there a perception issue here as well at the minute about perhaps consumer understanding of heat pumps and electric as being viable compared to perhaps how a consumer sees it, that they might not be that aware at the minute that the options are there now to be able to give sort of effective electric heating, as opposed to the idea of it being LPG or a gas boiler, obviously.
Yeah, there's definitely an awareness issue, and given the nature of the installations that have happened to date, there does end up being a perception issue that it only works here or only works there. That's not necessarily the case.
That's brilliant. I mean, the other question, James, was from a Kensa perspective. Obviously, there is an interest in stepping up sort of ground source heat pump adoption as a means of eliminating sort of fossil fuels, particularly for 2025. That I know government and the former Chancellor Philip Hammond has openly put as a strong commitment he wanted to see, which was ending fossil fuel heating in the next few years. But also, as our summit was hearing, the likely solution is going to be perhaps a mixture of technologies that could be a gas grid switch to hydrogen, forms of biofuels. I was wondering what potential there is for a connected district-style systems, and I know Kensa's been involved in this, but also how that looks at combining different heat technologies in an area and region. And I was wondering, can we have more combined approaches, gas and electric, in these sort of network solutions, or does there need to be perhaps a siloed approach where we'll have a region that is perhaps gas, biogas, or electric? If there's a technical challenge there that means we still need we'll have regions or areas or cities perhaps that are gas or electric in terms of heat. I was wondering where you see. I mean, is there an option to, and for the other panelists as well, to support a sort of more mixed approach in regions and in these districts as well?
If I could kick off there, I think you're very much right. There isn't a silver bullet. If there was a solution that ticked all the boxes all the time, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. You mentioned hydrogen. Our view on hydrogen, and I think it's one that's shared by many people that don't share a gas grid, or don't own a gas grid rather, is that it's a great fuel. It's going to have some very key important uses, but that to create it only then to burn it, heating people's homes, is a crazy waste of energy. I think that's going to be a subject of a future H&V News webinar, so I wouldn't dwell on that too much.
Yes, a bit of cross-promotion in that.
Our view is that ground source heat pumps have a huge role to play moving forwards. Once you have the ground array infrastructure, that ground loop infrastructure, that gives you all kinds of additional benefits. It gives you much better operating efficiency and much more flexibility around when you can run it, as well as being the lowest carbon heating system. The operating efficiency is important because as that will have an impact on the type of power stations that we need in this country and how many power stations we need. So how you electrify heat has an impact on the whole energy system, whether you've chosen the most efficient option or the least efficient option, and also critically the most flexible option or the least flexible option. So if you've got a heating solution like a ground source heat pump where it doesn't matter whether it runs at 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon because there's no effect from air temperature or anything else, then you've got much more flexibility to run the heating appliance and use electricity when the wind is blowing. And that's where key other bits of the energy system, like the electricity supply and smart controls, all feed together to produce a system that works best for all stakeholders.
I was going to ask, it's a nice segue there. Obviously, our other guest this morning, we've got Tom Robbins of Switchee and Phil Steele of Octopus with us as well. And if I could start off with Tom and then go to Phil as well. In terms of when we talk about decarbonisation of heat, I was wondering, obviously in your partnerships with Kensa and other groups as well, you will obviously have unique sort of specialisms in terms of controls. In the case of Switchee there, which I hope I've got right, and Octopus obviously in terms of the energy supply. I was wondering what role both the companies and the technologies and solutions have played in this perhaps more holistic approach to working together to decarbonise heat. Tom, if that's possible to start with you on that one now.
Yeah, so Switchee's mission has been to improve the quality of life for people living in rented accommodation. So we've been working predominantly with gas boilers now for 5 years. So this move to heat pumps has been really interesting and really exciting for us as part of a mission to really reduce, to decarbonise, play our part in decarbonising the grid. We see ourselves as being the interface between the resident and the system. So it's our screen that sits in this corner of their home, and it's a relationship that requires trust. They need to have that trust that it will be hot when they want it to be hot, that they want it to be warm when they want it to be warm, but also when their bill comes through, there isn't going to be a huge amount of shock. And so that's quite a responsibility, and we found, particularly working in social housing, where there's probably the tightest bill controls. A lot of people on sort of pay-as-you-go meters. Building that trust takes time, and having those controls in place take time, and perhaps in a way that you wouldn't have in the private sector. You'll leave your nest or your hive to do whatever it's doing, and you pick up the bill at the end of the year, and you'll go, ooh, a bit higher than I expected, but don't worry about it. We're not able to do that. We're working with clients that are looking certainly on a day-to-day, if not week-to-week basis, and where they're controlling their budget. So the bit of technology we want to really bring is this sort of behavioural interface, which is the way in which we communicate what the system is doing to the resident, and that system is being ever smarter. But the resident needs to have a buy-in in that. The resident needs to understand what the system is doing and when, and the saving it's making. It's not just enough that you can sort of fire and forget. So the role that we play is that really understanding how residents get the best out of their system and communicate that back to them. So it's both the technology, but I think it's really technology interface is the bit that we provide here.
I was going to ask Tom, in our coverage of smart controls, and we've talked about that. Sometimes there's the idea that truly smart systems, automate and run almost free of the user. I was wondering, just it's not too broad a question, that balance of how you give the idea that obviously people have that control, but you're also informing you're obviously informing smarter operation and operating perhaps at best performance factors that obviously may not be obvious to, as you said, to an end user who just wants thermal comfort day in, day out there.
I think we're somewhat jumping to one of the key challenges here with heat pumps is the way that the system operates differently from the way the user perceives it to operate. And bridging that gap and educating that gap and helping the resident and the operators understand the way the resident thinks as well as a key part of our role in this. You see it, and I have a number of devices at home. I'm constantly sort of testing us against our competition, both in the consumer sector and in the social housing space. And what I find, I have to say, is quite some frustration. When your system behaved in a way that you didn't expect or didn't do what you wanted it to do, it can be very. The natural reaction is to turn off a whole bunch of the smart features. I certainly have done it. Why on earth has my system set itself to 23 degrees at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? And for me, it's slightly irritating. When we're working with people that are often in fuel poverty and are having to make a decision about whether they're heating or they're eating, that becomes much more emotive, and that moves much more to a place around quite some fundamentals of trust. And I have had conversations, where a resident has felt that their heating system is stealing from them. It's operating in a way they didn't expect, and that education piece has been really important to us. How do we make it as smart as possible? As in, it's using the least possible resourcing at the most efficient time, but also doing it in a way that the resident has the trust and the confidence in it. Because if you lose that trust and confidence, you don't make any of the savings. You make the whole situation worse as it moves into a very complicated kind of manual environment, which creates worst possible loading on the system. So that not just education, but a behavioural insight piece is actually the way that we can make it smart, perhaps a little bit more so than some sort of super algorithm that pips it on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock in the morning. If the resident's not expecting that and they're watching their fuel card, then that's taken £2.50 off their fuel card. That is material. You need to they need to have understood why it's done that at that time and why it's to their benefit.
The discussion also touched upon the issue of energy supply and tariffs. It makes sense, after all, that a move to electric heating will require an effective and affordable supply of renewable electricity. For Steele of Octopus Energy, a UK-based renewable energy supplier, he says the UK should expect a surge in adoption of heat pumps over the coming years, but this will call for new approaches to providing tariffs that can influence more sustainable consumer behaviour. I asked Mr. Steele then how Octopus was seeking to go about this as a supplier.
What our ambition is. We're a 100% renewable energy supplier, so getting people off gas and onto electric is really important to us. So we're really big fans of ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps. It was interesting actually, when we had the Prime Minister and the Chancellor visit the office a few weeks ago, we had a Weissmann air source heat pump as part of the setup and the demonstration there to show them some of the technology that we've got. And they recognised immediately what it was and said, he's air source heat pump. Really excited to see those and wanted to learn more about what those are capable of doing with getting to carbon neutral and reducing carbon emissions. So that's really encouraging that you see kind of two very senior politicians recognising the benefit of heat pumps. But then you look at the scale, and as James was saying, that the scale is very low at the moment. The take-up is fairly small, but that's going to increase a lot over the next few years. And there's it becomes dependent on the technology that you're putting in. So whether you've got ground source heat pumps that Kensa are putting in with large-scale arrays, and as a property you tap into that, so the shoebox type design, or whether it's an air source heat pump like those from Weissmann and others, which is a fairly large machine that replaces your gas boiler, and it's got to sit outside and so on. And then you kind of start to look at the myths that exist at the moment. So there's this kind of myth that you can't just replace a gas boiler with an air source heat pump, and you've got to change all the radiators, and is it slow to warm up and slow to warm down? In fact, I spent a lot of time talking to the various heat pump associations, and that is no longer a myth. You can just replace a gas boiler with an air source heat pump and use your existing radiator system. You have to get the sizing right and dimensioning right and things, and there is a bit of behaviour change because it's more for a continuous background temperature than ramping up and down rapidly. But the technology is there and it's proven. Then you've got the challenge of the cost of putting in that equipment. So that has to be addressed and solved through incentives and things. So that's where we'd like to see government putting forward more proposals and things to be able to support heat pump take-up. If you look at the ground source arrays that Kensa are putting in, what's really interesting there is that for a customer, it's simply tapping into the network once the network's been put in. So the investment there is in the network. That then becomes an asset class that can be invested in to support consumers to take that up. So now you're saying, right, how do we put in those large-scale arrays? Then the third part is the pricing, and what am I going to pay for it? So if I compare the cost of electricity at the flat rate tariff of 15 pence against the gas rate of, say, 3 or 4 pence per kilowatt hour, there's a magnitude difference, there's a significant difference. But you take into account the COP that you can get from a heat pump, anywhere from 2, 3, 4 is possible, plus the inefficiency that we always miss on a gas boiler. You don't get 100% efficiency on the 3 pence per kilowatt hour that the gas is consuming, and you actually end up close to parity already. And that's before you consider some of the smart tariffs that we've been launching, such as the Agile. We've got customers now on Agile that have got their average bills down to about 10 pence per kilowatt hour on electricity. I wouldn't, though, advocate customers to invest in a heat pump, say an air source heat pump solution, over 5 years against a tariff like Agile, because we can't guarantee that tariff will be there for 5 years. It's a 12-month tariff. We could renew the algorithm that it's calculated on. It's more of a proof of concept innovation tariff to prove that time-use tariffs are interesting for customers and that they will adopt them and they'll do things with them, and prove that you can use price to influence behaviour. There's this kind of, again, it's another assumption, another myth, that we just take whatever price we've got, 15 pence, and we don't modify our behaviour according to price signals, because it's never really been done before. As soon as we've done it, we've actually demonstrated the difference. Actually, I'll give you an interesting example. So over the weekend, the Agile rate actually went negative. It went very negative at 1 a.m. last night, and then 1 a.m. again last night, as it was the clocks went back on Sunday morning. The electricity price dropped to -8 pence in some regions, and even as low as -9 pence in the north of Scotland. I saw somebody on Twitter comment who works in the National Grid Centre that we actually put an extra demand on the grid for about 120 megawatts of people that were reacting to that and consuming electricity when it was cheap in those early hours of Sunday morning. So we've shown that people react to a price. That's the point. And now we want to do that with electrical technologies such as ground source and air source heating.
I guess that was Phil Steele of Octopus Energy there. We'd like to thank Phil, along with Tom Robbins of Switchee and James Standley of Kensa Heat Pumps, for joining us for this latest Heatingcast. Join us next time when the same panel will discuss concerns about a lack of broader support for electric heat in order to ensure it can meet the immediate need for greener solutions in new buildings. This will be a vital part, after all, of government policy. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Goodbye.